for people that aren't aware of nitric oxide, what is nitric oxide and the core role that it plays in our bodies and our health?
Well, it's a naturally produced gas. It's a signaling molecule, and it controls everything we know about health, longevity, and human optimization. It was first discovered as a vasodilator. So what that means, when it's produced in the lining of the blood vessel, it dilates the blood vessels. So now we get better blood flow, better circulation, better oxygen delivery to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body. But it's also produced in our brain and our neurons. It's a neurotransmitter. It's how our immune system kills off bacteria and viruses, or any pathogen for that matter. So yeah, it's a naturally produced signaling molecule. Our Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998 for its discovery as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. It's a fundamental, foundational, naturally produced molecule.
Yeah, I was wondering as I was researching this, why it's not something that's talked about as much as some of the other components of health and wellness and just vitality in general. There's so much information that's out there, and I feel like it's quite rare that I run into people talking about nitric oxide. And I think you're really one of the few people that I've known that are talking about it and that are really deep into the science. So what is it you feel about nitric oxide that's not really been exposed and talked about?
Well, I see the awareness growing, and I see other companies, other voices start to talk about nitric oxide because it's a growing market. And a lot of companies want to enter this space, but honestly, they have no idea about the underlying science of nitric oxide. So that's a frustration for me, because I spent almost 30 years in the nitric oxide field. But I think the reason is it's still a relatively new discovery in science and medicine. This molecule wasn't really discovered until the early 80s, late 70s, mid 80s, and Nobel Prize in 1998. And we know historically that it takes on average about 17 years for new discoveries to become kind of standard of care or part of the normal physician-patient conversation. We're certainly past 17 years. The challenge for us in the nitric oxide field is, how do you capture this fleeting gas therapeutically? Right, and because there's no FDA-approved indication for nitric oxide besides inhalative nitric oxide therapy, and it's not part of the standard physician-patient conversation in labs, it's not something we test for, it kind of goes unnoticed. But, in the scientific literature, there are over 200,000 scientific papers published in the scientific and medical literature. So the scientific community, I'm excited about nitric oxide, been excited about it for, past 30 years, but the lay audience, consumers, still don't have a good understanding of nitric oxide. And I think that's why these conversations between you and I are so important, because not only does it bring awareness around nitric oxide, but, from somebody who spent 25 years in the trenches, in the research lab, trying to understand how nitric oxide is produced, what leads to a loss of nitric oxide production, then I have, a set of skills and understanding that allow me to develop nitric oxide products that actually work.
Yeah, so I'm listening to this, if I'm thinking about someone that's listening to on the other side, they're probably thinking, who cares? Like what's the purpose of this? Meaning, what is the consequence of low NO in older adults or adults in general? What actually happens when we lack nitric oxide in our bodies?
Well, it's a good question, and it's so what we know, and this is based on both basic science data and translation of that science into clinical medicine, that once you start to lose the ability to naturally produce nitric oxide, that's the earliest event in the onset and progression of all chronic disease, including cardiovascular disease, which still remains the number one killer of men and women worldwide. So when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, there's a set of symptoms. There's a hierarchy of symptoms that start to develop. So number one, you develop erectile dysfunction. We call that the canary in the coal mine. It's really the first sign and symptom that something's going wrong in your body with its ability to produce nitric oxide and dilate blood vessels. So to get an erection in both men and women, you have to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs. And that's done through nitric oxide. If your blood vessels can't make nitric oxide, you don't get relaxation, you don't get engorgement, and we develop erectile dysfunction. Huge problem. 50% of the men over the age of 40 self-report ED. And I think the numbers are much higher because most men 40 years old aren't going to self-report ED. And we're seeing it now in kids 20, 25 years old. So it's a systemic disease. It's not just a problem in the vascular bed of your sex organs. It's a systemic problem. And if you don't correct it, your blood pressure starts to go up. 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. Huge problem. Number 3, you start to get metabolic disease. Nitric oxide is required for insulin cycling and glucose uptake. 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unfit. Insulin resistance is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. Number 4, you start to develop exercise intolerance. If you can't go out and walk briskly for 20 minutes or walk up a flight of steps without getting short of breath, your body's not making nitric oxide. And then 5thly, you start to develop mild cognitive impairment. You lose regulation of blood flow to the brain. You develop dementia and eventually Alzheimer's. And nitric oxide explains everything we know about the metabolic and vascular phenotypes of Alzheimer's.
I hear about the effects that it could happen when people have ED or lack of blood flow in general. I guess because there's so many different ways to get there for an older adult, which is lack of blood flow, they're just eating bad, they're not exercising. How can you attribute that to nitric oxide, particularly because there's a lot of factors that come with a result like ED or Alzheimer's or even heart disease? I guess like for someone listening, it's like, how do you know what is the impact that it has on these consequences?
Well, look, it's a good question, but before we could even answer that question, begin to start to even contemplate that question, we first have to understand, how does the human body make nitric oxide? Because you can't fix something that goes wrong if you don't know how the system works. So that's what I spent 20 years doing. How does the human body make nitric oxide? Once we understand those production pathways, then we can start to understand, okay, what leads to a loss of nitric oxide production, for example, by the enzyme nitric oxide synthase that's found in the lining of the blood vessel. We know what leads to NOS uncoupling. It's oxidation, oxidative stress of tetrahydrobiopterin, NOS uncoupling, lack of nitric oxide production. So, and exercise stimulates and activates nitric oxide production. So if you're not exercising, you're losing the natural activation and stimulation of nitric oxide. Vitamin D, for example, activates, stimulates nitric oxide production. If you're deficient in vitamin D, you become nitric oxide deficient. And then this other pathway that's discovered about 30 years ago involves diet and oral bacteria and stomach acid. So if you're not eating a good diet, if you're using antiseptic mouthwash, if you have fluoride in your toothpaste, you're killing the microbiome, you can't make nitric oxide from the food you eat. If you're taking antacids, proton pump inhibitors, you're completely shutting down nitric oxide production. So when we look at what causes ED, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, it's multifactorial, right? It's the known risk factors. It's poor diet, lack of physical exercise, it's smoking, it's diabetes, insulin resistance. All of those contribute to a rapid onset and progression of vascular disease. But at the end of the day, no matter what it is that's contributing to that, it all leads to a loss of nitric oxide production. So when we focus on, the analogy I use is nitric oxide. If you've got a string of dominoes and if you want to start that cycle, nitric oxide is the first domino. And once you knock over that first domino, all the other second messenger systems, the signaling, the vasodilation, inflammation, oxidative stress go down, and you get normal cellular metabolism. But until you knock that first domino, you can knock the domino down, towards the end, but everything upstream of that isn't going to be affected. And so nitric oxide is the upstream mediator of everything you know about vascular disease and metabolic disease.
And how does one actually measure their NO levels? Because, it's considering how much of a domino effect it has on other parts of your organs and bodies or even our brains. It seems like this is something that you should measure on an annual basis as part of your blood work. But walk us through kind of how you actually measure it so that you can try to play around with those numbers.
Well, that's been a huge challenge because it's very difficult to measure nitric oxide. Because as I mentioned, nitric oxide is a gas. And then once it's produced in the body, it's gone in less than a second. Right? So we can't pick up gas diagnostically, this nitric oxide gas. What I revealed about 25 years ago through our research is, my focus was once nitric oxide is produced, where does it go? What does it become? And what function does it play? And so in the research environment, we can pick up these nitric oxide metabolites and kind of get a sense of our nitric oxide production or capabilities, but it's not used clinically. You can't go to your doctor, your phlebotomist, and say, hey, what are my nitric oxide levels? So, years ago, in fact, 25 years ago, I developed the first non-invasive point-of-care diagnostic. It's a salivary test strip because we were measuring salivary nitrite as a proxy for systemic nitric oxide production. And there's limitations to that, but it gives you a good sense. But there were too many false positives, right? So if you've got an active oral infection, it's going to light up that test strip, and it's not reflective of systemic nitric oxide production. So I abandoned the patents on those. There are a number of companies out there selling them, but I don't use them anymore because they're really not that useful. So to answer your question, we have to do functional measurements. There's not a way we can pick up nitric oxide biochemically in a clinical setting. So there's some FDA-cleared medical devices out there that look at what's called flow-mediated dilatation. And these are functional measurements of how much nitric oxide the endothelium, the lining of the blood vessels, produces. So there are a number of docs and clinics out there that have them. They're not as pervasive as they need to be, but really that's the only way to measure endothelial function, nitric oxide production. So what we have to rely on are the symptoms. If you start to develop mild ED, if you have blood pressures anything over the 120/80, if you start to develop insulin resistance and blood sugar goes up and hemoglobin A1C goes up, all those are signs and symptoms of nitric oxide deficiency. So again, you got to change your diet, change your lifestyle, and start to focus on restoration of nitric oxide, then everything else will fall into place.
Got it. So is it safe to say that because there's a correlation between our blood pressure levels and how our blood is flowing through our bodies and also our blood sugar, that if we can just do the things that improve those two things, chances are, even though we can't measure NO levels on an accurate basis right now, that doing those things, because of the correlation that it has, will also help improve NO levels. And obviously not doing those things will hurt NO levels.
No, for sure. So nitric oxide fixes the physics problem of high blood pressure. So when you think about pressure, right, this is a physics problem. So we have a finite amount of blood pumping through all the blood vessels throughout our body, usually 5.5 liters of blood. And so if we make nitric oxide, we dilate the blood vessels. So that same volume of blood is going through bigger pipes. And physics tell us that pressure is normalized. So if we have that same volume of blood, but now we can't make nitric oxide and our blood vessels are chronically constricted, we've got that same volume of blood going through smaller pipes. And simple laws of physics tell us that pressure has to go up. So if you want to titrate in or dose in nitric oxide or see what your endogenous levels are, if your blood pressure is more than 120/80, then your body's not making sufficient nitric oxide. And again, insulin resistance is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. We published a paper in 2011 showing that nitric oxide production inside the cell is required for insulin signaling and to get glucose into the cell and clear it from the circulation. If your cell can't make nitric oxide, your body can't make nitric oxide, you develop insulin resistance because insulin never gets the signal to GLUT4, which is the protein that goes to the membrane, binds glucose, and brings it into the cell. It causes resistance. It's insulin resistance. So insulin resistance in metabolic disease is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. So if you have good blood pressure, and I encourage people to use the continuous glucose monitor to see what spikes their blood sugar, and if it does, then you need to focus maybe on improving your metabolism, changing your diet, and focusing on optimizing nitric oxide production. But those are kind of the dosimeters, if you will, of how well your body is producing nitric oxide.
Got it. So if I'm listening to this, I'm 32 and I have pretty good blood pressure. I don't know my NO levels, but sometimes you get functions like having brain fog or being tired. But I don't know if that's because of my NO levels, because it's hard to measure that. So should I be worried as someone that is in their 30s of declining NO levels? What is that point where, now we have evidence around testosterone peaking at a certain age and then usually climbing down for the average person? Is there something that could be said for NO levels?
Yes, and so there's a number of clinical studies published showing that if you just take people in the general population, not excluding them for underlying problems, but just looking at age groups between 20 and 30, 30, 40, 40 to 50, at different decades, all the way up to 80 or 90 years old. What the clinical data tell us is that, and this is infusion of agonists like acetylcholine, bradykinin, looking at the response of the endothelium to make nitric oxide. It's really what we're looking at is the function of the nitric oxide synthase enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels to be able to produce nitric oxide gas. And what these data show in the general population, that we lose about 10 to 12% of our endothelial nitric oxide production per decade. So by the time you're 40, 50 years old, you have about 50% of the nitric oxide on average. Again, these are average, than you did when you were, 18, 20 years old. Then by the time you're 80 or 90, you've lost 90% of the nitric oxide you had. So that's this age-related decline in nitric oxide production from the lining of the blood vessels. But when we start to understand and look at different populations, we know that we can now shift this curve to the left or the right. For example, 20, 25-year-olds that are overweight, diabetic, hypertensive, they have the vascular age of the nitric oxide production of a 90-year-old. And I'm 51, but if you plot my nitric oxide and FMD on that age-related plot, then I fit within the 30 to 40-year-olds, like a 36-year-old. So we can prevent this age-related decline based on diet, lifestyle, things we do, or we can accelerate it based on diet, lifestyle, and things we do. So you're not destined to this age-related decline in nitric oxide production as in the general population. We understand the biochemistry and enzymology to the extent that now we can fix it, reverse it, and prevent that loss of nitric oxide production.
Yeah, that's probably a good segue to talk about maybe first what is actually killing our NO levels from the daily activities that we do, foods that we eat. We could probably, this alone is probably, we can get deeper into that, but what are the core couple that we should really be aware of that people may not even think about?
I think it's the American lifestyle. And when I say that, it's the standard American diet, what we call the SAD diet. It's lack of physical exercise. It's oral hygienic practices, using fluoride in toothpaste. 73% of the municipalities in the US put fluoride in their drinking water, killing all the bacteria in and on our body. It's use of antiseptic mouthwash. 2 out of 3 Americans wake up every morning and use mouthwash, and 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And then there's drug therapy. Cholesterol-lowering medications decrease nitric oxide production. Proton pump inhibitors completely shut down the body's ability to produce nitric oxide. We now know that there's data showing that people who have been on PPIs, these are the Prilosec, the Prevacid, the Nexium, the omeprazoles of the world. If you've been on those drugs for more than 3 years, 40% greater incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So they're completely shutting down nitric oxide production. And then the other major contributor, the primary contributor, is sugar. Anything that leads to an elevation in blood sugar, high glycemic index foods, sugar in beverages, sugars in supplements. Everything we eat and exposed to is sugar. And you think about this from a biochemical perspective. Glucose, which is the primary sugar circulating in the blood that the cell uses as a source of energy, is glue. Glucose is glue. It's sticky, right? And if you've ever spilt the soda on the countertop, come back the next day, it's sticky, and that's sugar. And so sugar sticks to proteins. It sticks to hemoglobin. We call that hemoglobin A1C. Sugar sticks to enzymes and glues them together. These enzymes can't perform their biochemistry, and it sticks to the enzyme nitric oxide synthase and locks it in a conformational change where it can't make nitric oxide. So anything that leads to an elevation in blood sugar is eventually leading to a loss of nitric oxide production, not only in the enzyme, but also in the oral microbiome, because sugar completely changes the microbiome, lowers salivary pH, allows for caries-causing bacteria, and shuts down the growth of these non-pathogenic commensal bacteria that are responsible for producing nitric oxide. So sugar is the enemy. Processed foods are the enemy. Seed oils are the enemy. Antacids, fluoride, antiseptic mouthwash. All those lead to a rapid decline in nitric oxide production.
Yeah, so the fluoride really got me. Mouthwash, I was aware of it, but let's talk about fluoride for a little bit. What is the history there? Because I know, Robert F. Kennedy, he's very big into getting fluoride out of our waters.
Rightfully so.
But how did it even get there? And what is the impacts of fluoride in general, apart from killing our NO levels?
Well, I asked that same question. How did we get here? Right. And so when you go back, you have to go back more than 100 years. And more than 100 years ago, it was first recognized there's an oral systemic link. So people with poor oral hygiene had higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, all-cause mortality. And then they started culturing, people who died from sudden cardiac death. They could, on autopsy, they could take the thrombus that's caused sudden cardiac death, and in that thrombus were oral bacteria. So there was translocation of oral pathogenic bacteria that got into our systemic circulation, caused inflammation, caused an immune response, LPS reaction, it caused plaques to rupture, and it's sudden cardiac death. So again, this was 100 years ago when it preceded the discovery of a microbiome. So the approach was, if oral bacteria are translocating, that's why bleeding gums are so important, because it opens up the cardiovascular system to oral pathogens. Let's kill all the bacteria in the mouth. Let's use fluoride. And municipal water flows through pipes. There's always bacteria in the pipe, so they put fluoride in pipe to kill the bacteria in the water you drink, in the water you cook in, and the water you bathe in. So it was with good reason. But look, today we know that the bacteria that live in and on our body outnumber our human cells 10 to 1. So really, we're 10 times more bacteria than we are human. And today we know that if we destroy the microbiome, it causes systemic disease. And we know that overuse of antibiotics disrupts the gut microbiome, causes systemic disease. And so by the same argument, we should not destroy the oral microbiome every day with fluoride, with mouthwash, because the bacteria that live in and on our mouth are necessary for production of nitric oxide, for helping in digestion. The bacteria that live in our gut are different than the ones that live in the mouth because they're different metabolic demands. The bacteria that live on our skin are different than the mouth. The bacteria that live make up the microbiome of the female, the vagina, are there to do specific jobs. And when we kill these bacteria, we cause systemic disease. People who use antibacterial soaps have dermatitis, acne. People chronically overuse antibiotics have gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, autoimmune disease. We and others have published if you disrupt the oral microbiome, you shut down nitric oxide production, your blood pressure goes up, and you lose the protective benefits of exercise. So we have to focus on supporting the microbiome and not destroying it, which is what everybody's doing.
Yeah, initially I should thought fluoride was put into our waters for more underdeveloped communities that maybe couldn't afford orthodontists, and just putting it in the water was a way for them to have cleaner teeth than being able to go to these services. But yeah, regardless, I mean, I think it seems like the evidence is out there. And there should be countries, I believe, that took away fluoride or reduced it significantly without any effects in these underdeveloped nations or underdeveloped communities, right?
So when you look at the dental utility of fluoride and reason for fluoride rinses, because early on it was thought that fluoride could help remineralize teeth, right, and prevent cavities and all that. But if you look, and from a chemical perspective, from your high school chemistry class, there's the periodic table, right? And on the far right side of that periodic table, next to the noble gases, what we call halogens: fluoride, iodine, chloride, bromine. And so those are what we call electrophilic molecules. They like to steal electrons. And so anytime you lose an electron, it's called oxidation. Oxidation is rust. So these are highly electrophilic molecules that steal electrons, cause internal oxidation. So again, that's strictly chemical speaking. But from a public health perspective, there was some early data showing that fluoride could provide benefit in the remineralization of teeth and killing caries-causing bacteria. But then when you start to look at the risk associated, what are the risks versus what are the benefits? The risks are fluoride's a known neurotoxin. Number two, it's an antiseptic, killing all the bacteria in and on your body. And number three, it shuts down your thyroid function because it competes with iodine for binding to the thyroid hormone and converting T4 to T3. And we have a global epidemic of hypothyroidism. We have a global epidemic of dysbiosis, oral gut dysbiosis, and the incidence of neurological disease is going through the roof. And now there's data showing that fluoride lowers IQ in kids by as much as 7 points. And even the National Toxicology Program published a really huge study on the safety and toxicity of fluoride and found that it provides no benefit, lowers IQ in kids, and really provides no benefit in oral care, in the remineralization of teeth. So if there's no benefit and it's enormous risk, that's a very simple quotient that Robert F. Kennedy understands, and you got to get rid of it. You got to get it out of the water. You got to stop using it in dental medicine. You got to get it out of toothpaste. And we don't need exposure to fluoride. It's a neurotoxin, it's an antiseptic, and it shuts down your thyroid.
Got it. So the two action steps there are get a water filter, I guess, that will take up fluoride, reverse osmosis, which is a little bit expensive, but
Yeah,
I'm sure there's
then
other.
remineralize it. You don't need distilled reverse osmosis water. You need minerals back in the water. So you need a water system that takes out the toxins, the fluoride, the chlorine, the chloramines, the drug metabolites in municipal water, and then remineralizes it. So you're getting good, safe, remineralized water in your household that you're drinking, you're cooking in, and you're bathing in.
Right. And look, I think it's certainly unrealistic to say that everybody's going to be able to get reverse osmosis. Listen to this. Some people may not even have access to it. So would like a typical Brita filter take out fluoride, or is it
Fluoride's a
only
very
through
small
reverse?
molecule. It's a very small
Yeah.
molecule that has to have a specific filter and technology to remove it. But a trick we use, and we can measure this in whether it's chlorine or fluoride. If you take a lemon or a lime and put it in your water, that the rind actually absorbs the chlorine and the fluoride. That's why it's beneficial to have lemon or lime in your tea or water you're drinking, because it absorbs the fluoride and the chlorine and any other bad things in there. But then don't eat the lemon or the lime. use
Right, right.
it as a resin to absorb the toxins.
And it has to be a solid lemon or lime that you put into the water.
That's right. It's the rind. It's the outside rind that absorbs it.
Gotcha. And what about mouthwash? So I stopped using mouthwash completely, and mostly I thought it was because of the alcohol in the mouthwash. But I just stopped using it completely. They started selling more like zero alcohol mouthwashes, and that's kind of gained more of a trend for people that want to use mouthwash but are still trying to be healthy. But is that also a no-go? Even though there's zero alcohol, is it still antiseptic and you should just stop using mouthwash in general?
I mean, if it says it's antiseptic, it could be alcohol-free, but could have chemical antiseptics in it. So I'm not familiar with these, but yeah, alcohol is a disinfectant. We use it to clean wounds, to disinfect. But anything that says antiseptic is bad news. I mean, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I still see the commercials that Listerine, for example, this kills 99.99% of the bacteria in your mouth. And they seem to be proud of that. They advertise it, and it's causing systemic disease. I mean, that's the worst thing you should do. I mean, you don't see drug companies advertising that, hey, this antibiotic is causing a gut dysbiosis because of killing all the bacteria in your gut. They know it does, but they certainly don't advertise it, right? Get Listerines out there saying, hey, we're going to make you completely aseptic in your mouth, which, by the way, is going to shut down your nitric oxide production. Your blood pressure is going to go up. You're going to develop ED. You're going to develop metabolic disease, and eventually going to get Alzheimer's. And they're advertising it.
Yeah, it's just, I think people just don't know. I think that's just the reality of it, right? So probably for them, from a marketing perspective, it works, which is sad, because people just associate bacteria with being a negative thing, especially with COVID. And
yeah, we're conditioned to be germaphobes. I mean, all during COVID, right? Wear masks. I get on a plane every week. I'm given this antiseptic wash to clean my hands and the seats, and I still see people doing this, disinfecting around them, giving antibiotics for a viral infection. I mean, it made no sense. It's making people more susceptible, more immunocompromised. We need to get out. Kids need to roll around in the dirt, eat dirt, inoculate themselves with bacteria, and because these communities of bacteria are healthy. They're the cops that keep the bad guys at bay. And when we start to disinfect the bacteria in and on our body, we become immunocompromised, and we're more susceptible to opportunistic pathogenic bacteria and immunocompromised. And I haven't been sick from a bacterial or viral infection in more than 20 years. And I certainly don't live in a sterile world. I'm in a different part of the world every week. I'm on an airplane in hotels, but I don't get sick.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Our relationship with bacteria and for me and how much that's evolved as I learn more. Growing up, I was in Korea, which is a very clean, like it's all about being sterile. And now now as I understand a little bit more about gut bacteria and microbiomes in general. You just said kids rolling around and not having to worry, playing with dirt and being okay with that. Um, and I see my nieces now doing the same thing, and I just kind of like I'm okay with it. Versus, I think my brother is probably freaking out because he doesn't understand as much about microbiome and all that stuff. So, relation to that and how we should clean ourselves. I'm assuming like um, uh, no like alcohol based liquids to wash our hands, right? Just soap.
No, just I don't use a lot of soap. I live in a very rural part of Texas, out on 800 acres. We grow our own food. We grow our own vegetables, raise our own beef. But, unless I'm out working and gets extremely dirty, I take a shower with and use soap. Otherwise, I just jump in my chemical free pool or take a shower and rinse off, because it's dysbiosis that causes smell, right? If you've got smelly poop, you've got gut dysbiosis. I mean, you can see it and you can actually measure this. If you've got bad breath, you've got it's the bacteria that stink. The body doesn't stink. It's the bacteria, the wrong bacteria on the body, in the mouth. If your armpits stink, that's dysbiosis. If your mouth stinks, it's dysbiosis. If your poop stinks, it's dysbiosis. It's the bacteria you're smelling, the wrong bacteria. So what we focused on is, let's support a healthy microbiome. Let's give the oral bacteria what they need. Let's give the dermal bacteria, the ammonia oxidizing bacteria, what they need to flourish. Let's feed the gut microbiome and give them prebiotics, probiotics, good food, to where your poop don't stink, your armpits don't stink, and your breath doesn't stink. And that's what I haven't used deodorant or antiperspirant in more than 20 years. I haven't used fluoride toothpaste in 20 years, or mouthwash. And, my breath
Well, you don't
didn't.
use toothpaste either?
No, I use toothpaste. I just haven't used fluoride toothpaste. In fact, I had trouble finding a toothpaste that I liked, so I had to create my own. I just launched a toothpaste, a fluoride-free hydroxyapatite-based toothpaste a couple of months ago, that also includes some components and prebiotics to help restore the oral microbiome and to neutralize salivary pH, to create an environment where the good guys can actually maintain and repopulate, and create an environment where the pathogens can't grow.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. The first person that's ever heard of not using toothpaste, do you follow Paul Saladino
Oh
by
yeah,
any
no problem.
chance?
Yeah, no problem.
The whole animal based diet that blew me away. I was like, how do you not use deodorant? How do you not use toothpaste?
Well, I
Or
use
I think he
toothpaste
does it.
again. I don't use deodorant. I haven't used deodorant more than
Yeah.
20 years. And what you find, look, there's a time that your body has to adapt, because if you're using, the worst thing people can use are antiperspirants. We need to perspire. Anything that's antiperspirant is very, very dangerous proposition, mostly because it's aluminum. Aluminum's toxic, but it kills the bacteria. It's destroying the microbiome. So a normal, healthy skin microbiome includes a lot of ammonia oxidizing bacteria. So when we sweat, we're excreting ammonia, right? And some people, you can smell that ammonia, especially those in dysbiosis. But if you've got normal, healthy skin microbiome, they're ammonia oxidizing bacteria. What do? They oxidize ammonia to nitric oxide. And it completely restores skin blood flow. It prevents fungal overgrowth, yeast infections, and provides for normal, healthy skin circulation, tone, texture, and clarity of your skin. And you don't stink. But as you kind of transition from using antiperspirant deodorant, there's going to be a period of time, a week or 10 days, where you're going to stink, because you've got to allow the odor causing bacteria to die off. You got to feed the good bacteria. And then, even when I'm sweat out working in July and August here in Texas, I don't have body odor, and I don't use a deodorant or antiperspirant. I sweat, sure. And yeah, everybody has kind of their own pheromones and unique smell, but it's not the smell of like a pungent, skunky body odor smell.
Yeah. Does Paul Saladino have bad breath? Have you met him in person?
Yeah, I've met him in person. He didn't come across. I didn't. I mean, he did knock me out with his breath, but I was probably a couple of feet away from him having a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, logically, I guess it makes sense, but it's just such an extreme that I'm like, I mean, sometimes you might eat something bad and you might have bad breath, right? Like, I
Well,
don't know.
I want to have a nice clean mouth and because of prebiotics. So I'm a big fan of brushing your teeth once in the morning and once before I go to bed. And I only brush my teeth twice a day, but I think it's important, especially brush, because you have to disrupt the biofilm, and kind of get rid of the pathogens, support the good guys, and leave your mouth feeling clean, but an environment that's conducive with good, healthy microbiome.
Yeah, so to be clear, I think he does have his own way of cleaning his teeth. It's
Yeah, probably
just,
baking soda or something like that.
yeah, something like super simple. Okay, so I want to shift over to increasing our NO levels. We talked a little bit about water, mouthwash, stuff that we should avoid. But what are the methods that you found to actually improve nitric oxide?
Well, first we have to get rid of in the body what's inhibiting the natural production, right? So we talked about that fluoride, mouthwash, and acids. And now we can start to stimulate and activate nitric oxide production. So optimize your vitamin D, get it above around 80, which is optimal. Moderate physical exercise. We used to say 20 to 30 minutes of moderate physical exercise a day, increase your heart rate, respiratory rate was good. I think that's still good. But now we're finding that, 5 to 6, 7 minutes of high intensity interval training can stimulate and activate nitric oxide production. 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight a day. Certain frequencies of sunlight and radiation that can stimulate nitric oxide release, activate mitochondrial activity, and improve energy production. And then, a diet that's free of sugar, high glycemic index foods. We'll throw in some more green leafy vegetables that you're getting a source of nitrate, that if you have the right bacteria and stomach acid, then the body can make nitric oxide out of that nitrate from our diet. And it's really that simple.
Got it. Regarding the sun exposure, I always wondered, again, I think this is my Korean background talking of like avoiding the sun. Like Korea is the only place where you'll go out and you'll see more umbrellas out when there's sun than when there's rain. So we're like very protective of, potential wrinkles and all that stuff. But obviously sun exposure is super important. So at least what I've started to do is I just put sunscreen on my face, but then the other parts of my body I just let sun expose. Does that have the same effect as, like, is there any benefit of having sun exposure on your face that you won't get from getting it on your arms, legs, and other parts of your body?
No, I think we need sunlight exposure on most of our body, and I think sunscreens, at least the ones that are commercially available here in the U.S., are toxins. I never use sunscreen, and I never would put sunscreen on my kids. Uh,
Even the mineral based ones, like with the zinc oxide.
yeah, maybe those are a little bit better than the ones that you did, but I'm not a big fan of sunscreen. We don't need to screen the sun. We need sunlight exposure. So what I do is typically my day starts, I'll get an infrared sauna in the morning before the sun comes up, 30 minutes at 170 degrees. So I'm sweating. Some days I'll do a 3-minute cold plunge at 37 degrees, but then I go outside and watch the sun come up. And I spend 20 or 30 minutes out there because that first sunlight kind of activates our pineal gland, changes our circadian rhythm. And then, it's that first sunlight of the day, which is extremely beneficial. And then, I just spent 7 days in Turks and Caicos on the beach, fully exposed to the sun. I don't wear sunglasses because when we're exposed to that bright sunlight on our face, in our eyes, it tells our body, hey, you're exposed to extreme sunlight. And so we're going to initiate some protective mechanisms. And so I spend 4 or 5 hours out in the sun. I get tan, but I don't burn. And then when I feel like I've had enough, I'll put shirts on or put a cap on or a hat on and cover my body. But I never cover my body with sunscreen. And obviously, you can overdo it. And so I don't recommend spending 10, 12 hours exposed in the sun. But I think moderate sunlight is extremely beneficial. And exposure and seeing that first sunlight of the day completely changed my sleep patterns and my circadian rhythm. But I'm 51 years old. I make a topical nitric oxide serum, but the fine lines and wrinkles. I've had the stressful last couple of weeks, but I typically have pretty good skin for a 51-year-old, and I don't wear
You look
sunscreen.
great.
I'm exposed to sunlight every day. So, but there are different skin types that are obviously increase your risk of exposure. Like an Irish, very
Have to
pale,
call it on out.
different,
Yeah.
yeah, different resistance or different, exposure risk on sunlight. Where I have somewhat darker skin, I tan really easily.
Yeah, for sure. I also heard, so you don't ever get burnt, you're saying, hey?
Now, look, I'm not going to say that. I've certainly overdone it and gotten sunburned where my skin peels within 3 to 4 days, and that's damaging. But here's what when we have an injury, and that's an injury. If our body making sufficient nitric oxide is a signal that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate, to repair damaged tissue, to replace cells that don't work properly. So, if you are exposed and you have an injury, and a sunburn is an injury, then you recover from that injury because we're mobilizing our own stem cells and replacing those damaged cells with new dermal cells and epithelial cells that actually work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is like, I've heard that for people that are getting sunburned super easily and that lasts a long time, there is something that's misfunctioning in our bodies if your skin is getting that burnt that fast. Could that have to do with nitric oxide levels, or is that something that is something different?
I mean, it's a very complex system. Nitric oxide may or may not have anything to do with it, but it depends upon the amount of melanin in your skin. The other thing which I see is people wearing sunglasses. So they're tricking their body into not thinking they're exposed to sunlight. And their body becomes extremely susceptible to that. So if you're getting direct sunlight in your sun, your body knows I'm exposed to some serious rays here. And they're protective mechanism that your body always adjusts to the environment in which it's surrounded. But if you're tricking your body and you're wearing sunlight, you're blocking the sunlight coming in, then your body's like, oh, I'm inside or I'm not exposed to sunlight, and you're more susceptible to sunburns. So if you're going to be out in the sun, at least for the first 5, 10, 15 minutes, don't wear sunglasses. Let your body know, hey, I'm exposed to some really serious rays here. And at least personally for me, I don't see the sunburns to the extent that I did, 20, 30 years ago when I didn't know it better and I was wearing sunglasses outside and going, shirtless, mowing the grass or whatever. And, a couple hours out there, my shoulders are burnt and I peel the next day. Now I spend 4 to 5 hours in the sun and not burn.
Wow.
But I think everybody's
it has changed. Interesting. What about food? What are nitrate-rich foods that people should be incorporating in their regular diets?
Well, on average, I mean, kind of generally speaking, it's the dark green leafy vegetables. And typically, the darker the green leafy vegetable, the higher the nitrate content. And you can compare this from fertilized, spinach or lettuce or cabbage to unfertilized. And the fertilized always has a darker green color and it increases yield. That's why we use fertilizers. So the darker the green leafy vegetable, typically on average, the higher. But the challenge was, and we studied this 10 years ago and we published this in 2015, because the question we were trying to answer is, if I wanted to use diet, how much celery or spinach or kale or arugula would I need to eat to get enough nitrate in that food that if I had everything else perfect, the right bacteria, sufficient stomach acid, everything working perfectly as it should, how much lettuce, celery, spinach would I need to eat to stimulate nitric oxide and bring my blood pressure down, normalize my blood pressure? And the result of that survey was we went to Dallas, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and Raleigh, and all over the U.S., the Midwest, the East Coast, West Coast, Deep South, and Northeast. And what we found was we bought the same vegetables from the same retail grocer and found that, for example, the celery that we bought in Dallas had 8 to 10 times more nitrate in it than the same celery from the same retail grocery that we bought in New York. Because there's differences in the growing season, differences in soil conditions, time of harvest, and how they grow the food. The whole field of agronomy is completely different. We're finding a lot of it's based on lightning storms. Because lightning, the air in the atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. And through lightning storms, that nitrogen becomes fixed into inorganic nitrate or ammonia. So nitrate becomes enriched in the soil in areas where there's a lot of lightning storms. So then obviously those vegetables grown in that nitrate-rich soil have more nitrate in the actual end food product. Then the other learning we had from that was organically grown vegetables have 5 to 10 times less nitrate than conventionally grown vegetables. Because in the US, to get an organic label, you can't add nitrogen fertilizer to the soil. You can add manure, compost matter, all that, but you can't add standardized nitrogen as fertilizer. And without standardizing the amount of nitrogen in the soil, you have no idea how much nitrate is in there. So the vegetables have a much greater variability of nitrate, organically grown vegetables, than conventionally grown vegetables.
Wow. Okay. So this might
Very
cause some
complicated. It's
confusion
very
for
complicated.
people, right? Because
Yeah.
I think most people think about the rule of eating organic as a good thing. It's more expensive. There's no glyphosate. There's no chemicals that are entering into our bodies.
But there's also
But
no
yet,
nutrients. I mean, if
but
you
there's
just
no
look
nutrients. You're
since
saying,
the 1940s, there's been surveys published on it. From the 1940s to the 2010s, there's a 78% decline in the basic micronutrients in the food grown in America across the board. And so this pressure of feeding a growing global population is at the expense of nutrient density. We don't do crop rotation anymore. Everything's big on organic farming. So we're not putting basic minerals and nutrients back in the soil. All the herbicides and pesticides that they're adding to the crops deplete the soil of basic nutrients and the bacteria, the nitrogen fixing bacteria. And you can't assimilate nutrients without nitrogen. So we have a huge problem, and the foods we eat aren't providing enough nutrients um, to facilitate human metabolism. And Linus Pauling famously said years ago that chronic disease is caused from nutrient deficiencies. I think that's still a major driver, but it's also exposure to toxins. I think it's a combination of nutrient deficiencies and toxins that are driving chronic disease. So it's almost impossible to get your nutrients directly from the foods grown in America because the foods that we eat are nutrient dense. So we almost have to supplement, and we have to supplement based on personalized testing, on micronutrient testing, to figure out what are you missing, what am I missing, because I may be repleted in certain things that you may have a deficiency in based on the foods you eat, your diet, where you live, and your microbiome.
yeah, that's so depressing. Like
Look, it's
because
hard work.
it's
It's hard work staying healthy. I mean, because we're
yes,
up against so many opposing forces and toxicities and deficiencies. It's hard work, and so to me, it's no wonder why Americans are the sickest people on the planet.
yeah, because like you said, right? Even if someone's trying to do something right, but they decide to go to a specific grocery store in New York versus Texas, and they think they're getting the right nutrients because they're eating celery,
Organic
it
growth.
turns out organic grown, and it turns out it has 70% less of the nutrients that you're supposed to be getting, and that's the main vegetable that you eat. So you're doing everything right, but you're still not able to get the results, and it's just so confusing for people that are trying to do the right thing as well, and the people that are not even attempting to do the right thing. They're already obviously having a
Yeah.
harder path.
Yeah, no, I think
Um,
there's no one size fits all. But generally speaking, I tell people, look, if you eat a balanced diet in moderation, get your nutrients from a wide variety of food sources, but always eat a lot of protein, good clean protein, good fats, limited carbs, no sugar, and no processed foods or seed oils, then you're checking a lot of boxes that on average you probably may do pretty good. But I would still recommend once or twice a year get some micronutrient blood testing and figure out, okay, am I still deficient in vitamin D? Do I have enough selenium, chromium, iodine, all these basic micronutrients that the body, magnesium. 75% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. Magnesium is involved in over 800 biochemical reactions. So these things are critically important for normal cellular metabolism and biochemistry. But if you got to know what your levels are, and so that's why you got to test.
yeah, I mean, this is the argument made by people that have the you know a carnivore diet or animal based diet with a little bit of berries or carbs. Is that vegetables and a lot of the things that we're eating have decreased nutrient profiles. And people that want to eat organs or grass-fed beef, that tends to have a very high density of nutrients per, whatever carb or whatever pound that they're eating. But wouldn't because the cows are also eating the vegetables that have the lower nutrients, wouldn't they also be lowering in the nutrients levels that they have from the cows as well?
Yeah, like the cow and animals are bioreactors, right? They're the vegetarians that that we eat. I'm a meat eater, right? And they're ruminants. They got several stomachs, a completely rich array of bacteria that are breaking down that and creating essential nutrients and metabolites that we as humans can do or can have. But yeah, so what they're doing, I mean, yeah, it depends upon the food that they eat, and it's reflective of the food that we're eating, the muscle that we're eating, or the organs that we're eating from them. And that's why, in my pastures, I do soil testing every year, once every couple of years. So I'll take a soil sample, I'll take it to the local U.S. Department of Agriculture office, and they'll do a complete soil analysis for me and see what's missing, what's the soil pH, how much nitrogen's in here, phosphate, potash, and then I customize and put minerals in it or fertilize based on that analysis. And then I run my cows on that. They eat the grass. I take the calves directly from the milk or the teat of the mom. All they had is grass and breast milk. And then I put them on a nutrient regimen, a growth regimen for 150 days and feed them non-GMO uh, diet. And I grow them for 150 days and I harvest my own beef. And it's the best beef you've ever eaten.
Man, the more I talked with you, the more I just realized how dialed in you are. I mean, you've got reverse osmosis throughout your pool, all over your showers. You're growing your own food. You've got the cold plunge, the infrared sauna. You got like 80 acres of farmland. You're growing your own, like it's
Yep.
wild. I don't. It's not a lot of
Hyperbaric,
people that have
yeah, I have a
hyperbaric
hyperbaric
chamber.
fan, got a LED bed. I've got lots of toys. I've accumulated a lot of toys over the years.
That's the dream. That's the dream. Yeah. Well, impressive. We're talking about supplements. So what are the core supplements that you recommend? I think you sell your own nitric oxide supplements. I've heard omega-3 supplementation also can help. It like increases arginine and that can boost nitric oxide synthesis. But what are your thoughts on supplements in general? What are the core ones we should be taking?
I used to take a handful of supplements every day, and then I realized I was probably making a lot of expensive urine. And so I've eliminated, kind of reduced the amount of supplementation. But I have a core, kind of a foundational. So I don't eat organ meats because I just don't like the taste, but I certainly recognize the nutrient density of that. So every morning I wake up, I take 6 capsules of wild bison organ meat. And it's in 6 capsules. It's from a company called Wild Mamas, make great products. They also make a salmon roe. So I don't take fish oils because fish oils, all the commercial fish oils are rancid. The lipids are oxidized, and it's some of them aren't great quality products. So I take salmon roe, 6 capsules of the salmon roe, and it gives me all my essential fatty acids and fish oils. And then I take a chlorella and a spirulina product, these algae products. So not only I take them before I get into the sauna, because not only are they acting as good binders, but they're pretty nutrient dense supplements. So that gives me kind of my land-based, sea-based nutrients: the wild organ meat, the salmon roe, and the algae products. And then I put on a topical glutathione at night before I go to bed. I take my nitric oxide powder in the morning. I take the lozenge throughout the day. And then at night, I take 700 milligrams of magnesium to help me sleep, to optimize my magnesium levels. And what else? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Just pretty simple. I've simplified my nutritional supplement regimen over the years, but I think I've dialed that in, and that works great for me. I'm 51. My blood pressure's 118 over 62. I don't have any insulin spikes, glucose spikes, but I work out every day. I try to eat a good diet. I watch what I eat. I do an 18-hour fast every day. Eat my last meal at 6. I don't eat till noon the next day. And then once a month, I'll do a 24-hour fast. Once a quarter, I'll do a 48 or 72-hour fast. And that works for me. And I feel good. I probably feel better in my 50s than I did in my late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah, I've also been taking the beef organs as well. And I guess for you, what that covers is because it's so nutrient dense. It's got copper, zinc, B12. It's got all of these things that you would normally have to take separately. That you're just covering a lot of bases taking those organs, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. And you got to look at nature. We try to recapitulate nature, right? So, um, you know, unfortunately, I have cows that die out here, right? And the coyotes will come in and the buzzards, and what's the first thing they eat are the organs. They don't eat the muscle, the skeletal muscle, until the very end. It's like the last thing, but that's the primary part that we eat, right? We ground it into ground meat or we eat steaks. It's the skeletal muscle. We should be eating the liver, the kidneys, the heart, the pancreas, things like that. But I just have an aversion to that taste and smell. So I take it as a capsule and I trust the company that makes it, that it's grass fed wild bison, that's no antibiotics. And of course, my cows and the beef that we harvest, no antibiotics, no vaccines, no growth hormone, anything like that. So it's good, clean meat. And it's, they're eating nutrient dense grass that I can analyze and optimize for.
Yeah. Um, in addition to food, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we breathe and how that impacts our NO levels. For a year, I've been using mouth tape so that I could try to breathe through my nose. I had breathing problems for a good portion of my life. I even had sinusitis, had to get surgery for that. But I just realized like how much of a difference that makes on my energy levels, how I wake up, how little I wake up. Talk to me about that and how the way we breathe, what parts of our bodies that we use to breathe can impact our health.
Now, I think optimal breathing is one of the most important things we can do because two reasons. Number one, you're either going to activate and stimulate nitric oxide production through nasal breathing, or you're going to completely shut down systemic nitric oxide production through mouth breathing. And it's really that simple. And so the enzyme, we talked about the enzyme that's found in the lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium, the nitric oxide synthase. Well, that same enzyme is found in our upper airway, in our epithelial cells. So just like if when we exercise, there's shear stress in the lining of the blood vessels that activates nitric oxide production and leads to vasodilation. So when we do nasal breathing, there's mechanoreceptors on these epithelial cells that are activated, and it tells those cells to make nitric oxide. So now the epithelium is making nitric oxide. We're delivering it into our airways. We're dilating the bronchioles. We're dilating the pulmonary arteries, and it's leading to better ventilation to perfusion ratios, and it's leading to better tissue oxygenation. But so that's the benefit of nasal breathing. The problem is the mouth is not a breathing instrument. It's not designed to be a breathing instrument. We breathe through our nose, we speak through our mouth. But you see these mouth breathers. And so when you're breathing through your mouth, you're bypassing this nitric oxide production pathway. But I think even worse is you're causing dysbiosis. You're fully oxygenating the oral cavity. You're lowering the salivary pH. You're completely changing the environment for the microbiome, leading to the more opportunistic caries-causing bacteria. We see people that mouth breathe have greater incidence of cavities, periodontal disease, gingivitis, and they're not fully oxygenating, and they develop apnea and hypoxia during your sleep. And if you're not fully oxygenating during your sleep and producing nitric oxide, you don't mobilize stem cells, you don't repair, you don't activate your autonomic nervous system and activate the parasympathetic system, and you wake up tired, grumpy, and you age quickly because your body's not making nitric oxide. So you have to breathe through your nose. But I think the qualifying statement for that is you need to go see an airway specialist to make sure you don't have an obstruction in your airway to where if you are taping your mouth, you're not suffocating. Because if you've had an anatomical obstruction, there's some really good dentists that can pull your jaw forward or put appliances in your mouth to open your airway to where you can safely tape your mouth and do nasal breathing at night and fully oxygenate.
Yeah. So, Dr. Bryan, we covered a lot here. We went all the way from food to how we breathe to sun beef organs. I want to leave people here as we close this out with some key takeaways, something that they can do today, something that is simple, something that's an actionable takeaway for people from all the things that we covered. What's a message we can leave people here with?
You have to understand how your body's producing nitric oxide, if it's producing and how much it's producing, and then take the steps to optimize your body's ability to naturally produce it. And so I tell people there's only two things you got to do. You got to stop doing the things that are inhibiting its natural production, and then start doing the things that's known to scientifically and clinically activate and promote its production. So if you use fluoride in your toothpaste, switch over. I make a great toothpaste called Cardio Smile that targets the oral microbiome. If you use mouthwash, you have to stop. If you're taking antacids, you have to wean off of these drugs. They're dangerous drugs. They're causing heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. And just change your diet. Stop eating. Wear a continuous glucose monitor. Anything that elevates your blood sugar, don't eat it again. And then, 20, 30 minutes of exercise. What I do is I do usually 6 to 8 minutes of high intensity interval training every morning. And then a little bit of sunlight, 20 to 30 minutes. You don't need 3 to 4 hours and risk burn, but 20, 30 minutes of first sunlight a day and intermittent fasting. And these are cost saving things to do, right? You're going to eat less. You're going to save money on mouthwash, save money on not using antacids. Exercise is free. Breathing is free. Sunlight's free. So it's very simple. But then when all else fails, we have products that do it for you. And, I felt an obligation because I spent so many years and decades in the research lab and made a lot of discoveries, have a lot of patents that, people are looking for solutions. And, we provide safe and effective solutions to produce nitric oxide. If your body can't make it, then we do it for you. And we fix the reason your body can't make it.
Beautiful. Dr. Bryan, appreciate you coming on and sharing all these insights. Where can people find you? I think you've got a book that you want to promote as well.
I just published my latest book called The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. This is it's a pretty quick read, but it talks about, the discovery of nitric oxide, what led to a Nobel Prize, what it is, why you should be concerned about it, and kind of my personal journey of discovery and innovations and developing drug therapy. You can find it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or go to nathansbook.com. And then I refer you to my YouTube channel. We provide, my only objective is to educate and inform on the science of nitric oxide so that you listeners can be informed and educated to know what you may be doing or not doing that's compromising your ability to make nitric oxide. And that YouTube channel is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, nitric oxide. I'm on Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or X at Dr. Nitric. And you can find our products at N101.com. That's the letter N, number 1, letter O, number 1.com.
Beautiful. We need to see a vlog of your dialed in farm, from the moment you wake up to, Bryan Johnson.
Yeah.
And how you're kind of at his level.
I'm not that extreme, John. I'm a reasonable guy.
You've got all the toys. So yeah, it'd be good to see some inspiration there. But I appreciate you, Dr. Bryan, for coming on. And we'll have the book linked below on the descriptions. And great to have you on here. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Take care.